This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. The early days of the 119th Congress and the second Trump administration have been a whirlwind, but here is one observation for those looking to make sense of things. Having a plan beats not having a plan. Here to discuss is my colleague here in the newsroom at CQ Roll Call, Jessica Wehrman. Jess, welcome. I figure there's a lot to keep track of, but I think we have a couple of examples that we can talk about where this is playing out, where having a plan beats not having a plan, especially if you're in Congress or the White House and trying to get something done in public policy.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You know, some of these observations that we're going to talk about are from some of the reporting that our colleagues have done. You edited a story, which we'll get to in a second, about Bill Cassidy and Senator Bill Cassidy, who is the chairman of the Health Committee in the Senate, and his support for RFK Jr. to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. But also some of this is coming from observations, from, even like a dinner last night that you and I attended, the Washington Press Club Foundation dinner. Caveat, I am a board member of that organization, so it's not like I'm a bystander there. But you and I had a lot of conversations with members of Congress, with other people who are involved in politics and campaigns and public policy here in DC. And then I just got back from a conference that I attended for the Public Affairs Council, in which I give a keynote talking to a lot of people in the advocacy world, everything from organizations that work on energy to, health to, human services. So some of it's a mix and match of our own research, our own anecdotes, and I don't know, I figured it'd be a good conversation because it does seem that one difference between, say, the early days of the first Trump administration and the early days of the second Trump administration is that they came in with more of a plan, more of a coherent plan of action, and it's caught a lot of people off guard.
Absolutely.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Let's talk about confirmations first. I mean, I think this is the first good example of the having a plan and its value. If you want to get something done, this is the way to do it. The early nomination process was a little, was defined, I think, by Matt Gaetz.
I was going to go cough, Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, who was the butt of a lot of jokes and at the dinner, and continues to be the sort of humor gift that keeps on giving for a lot of congressional Democrats and Republicans. But he was nominated to be Attorney General. That nomination lasted a mere days before he dropped out. And then, there was this speculation like, well, are some of these other folks, where there are legitimate questions about whether they have the experience to run a cabinet level position, or whether their beliefs are consistent with the missions of those cabinets. So something like Robert Kennedy Jr., who is, has disparaged science and the science, settled science on vaccines and their efficacy, or Pete Hegseth, who is on the younger side in terms of people who have run the Defense Department, and whether
and has some personal issues as well that have
but it seems like I would hazard to guess that there are. That the administration is on kind of a roll with Senate confirmations.
They haven't really lost anyone since Gaetz, honestly.
Nope. And really, so they haven't lost any votes. I mean, Hegseth was close. He had 3 Republican senators vote against him: Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and Mitch McConnell. But with the 50-50 Senate, the Republicans have the tiebreaker in Vice President J.D. Vance, and they were able to get Hegseth confirmed. One of the observations that somebody made to me, who's someone who's a former staffer, it was that nobody wants to be the fourth vote. You can lose 3 Republican senators, but nobody wants to be that deciding one and invite the wrath.
Yes, if you're that person, then you're going to have MAGA descend on you the right hand of God. I mean, you can't understand. Bucking the president is something that you just you just don't do it if you're in the Republican Party now. I mean, look at Liz Cheney, look at Adam Kinzinger. They don't have careers in Congress anymore. They are actually, in some cases, they face a lot of threats. This is not. You don't want to be the person who keeps President Trump from his agenda in Washington if you are a Republican.
And I think that like the Cassidy, like let's talk about this a little bit because one of the folks on your team, Leah DeGroot, our colleague, wrote this pretty good story about how Bill Cassidy, again, this guy was a doctor. He is a doctor, but he was a doctor for 3 decades before coming to Congress. And he's somebody who knows that vaccines work and that public health, there are certain things that we accept as the truth when it comes to public health, and particularly if you're a doctor, and how he struggled. He obviously was struggling with his vote about whether to vote for Kennedy. He's the chairman of the health committee also, so he's in a position of authority, and people, I think, were looking at him. He did vote to convict Donald Trump in the second impeachment to remove him from office or to bar him from running for office again. And so he's shown that he's willing to buck the president. And he, in his floor speech, and Leah gets into this in her story, and also the pressure that he's feeling with a possible primary challenge in next year in the next cycle, he just described this flood of calls and information seeking to influence his vote, and most of it being, from people who were supporting Kennedy. He did hear from some skeptics.
I mean, there was a lot of money that's being spent right now to try to stop Kennedy. I don't know that it's going to do much at the end of the day now that Cassidy has sort of shown his cards. Cassidy is a gastroenterologist. He told a story at the Senate Health hearing that was kind of moving about a girl who was basically being medevaced out because she had a disease that could have been prevented with, I think it was a Hep B vaccine, if I'm remembering correctly. He told the story in very emotional terms. This was his career. First, do no harm. He was really struggling with the vote. He is also probably struggling with the primary challenge coming up from John Fleming, who is a former congressman who's been critical of him for his impeachment vote. This is sort of the reality now. I just finished reading Mitt Romney's biography and sort of listening to how when he chose to buck and when he chose not to. But you do face such wrath if you're a Republican for bucking Donald Trump. So if you have an urge to fight back, you also have to think about your sort of political existence. And if you're Cassidy, you're weighing, not only is MAGA going to come after me, but what was my career going to be like afterwards? I mean, am I going to be, is my career effectively over?
Right. And again, these pressure campaigns we've seen, we don't need to get into detail about with some of the other nominees who have been signaled as like kind of being on the edge, but Tulsi Gabbard, we mentioned Hegseth, there were coordinated plans to influence the right people, who were key votes. And it appears that, it's now looking likely that they may get all of their nominees confirmed. Now, again, there's only a couple who have, that look like they were in trouble. But that would be pretty extraordinary.
Hegseth and Kennedy getting confirmed, I think, is a pretty big deal. These were lightning rods. And the idea of an anti-vaxxer running HHS. Now, Cassidy supposedly secured all of these commitments from Kennedy before getting his vote. I don't know the degree to which that's actually going to come to fruition, or if this is kind of lip service.
Politicians make promises all the time.
Right?
To get votes.
You do. You say what you have to say to get elected. And then you also think, we're talking about Cassidy's career, but we're also talking about, in some cases, personal threats, safety threats. This is the world that we're facing now. So,
and I want to contrast that with, some of the anecdotal evidence that we've seen. We've seen a number of members of Congress say, I've got a record amount of calls coming in to talk about, to express their opinion about what's going on with the dismantling of USAID by the Trump administration, by the DOJ, which we'll talk about DOJ a little bit also, or just the way Elon Musk and his DOJ has gotten access to the payment system in the Treasury Department, and access to sensitive information of the Office of Personnel Management, and the thing that struck me was that it's Democrats also that people are calling, when we don't want to use names because some of these conversations were said in confidence to us, but there are Democrats who are getting pressure from progressive groups and so forth, and there's not anything that the Democrats can really do. I mean, there's things that they can do to slow things down a little bit.
It kind of depends. It depends on the chamber you're in. If you're in the House and you're a Democrat, there are very few things that you can do as a member of the House minority to effectively. I mean, you can not show up for votes, but they'll vote at the end of the day anyway. And the Senate has a few more levers of power that they can. I mean, it's a little easier to gum up the Senate than it is the House.
Yeah.
So if you're in Congress right now, you're doing that. And I have to say also, by the way, it's Republicans who are getting flooded with calls as well. Both sides of the aisle are getting flooded. I read a report yesterday that the two senators from Ohio, who are both Republicans, you couldn't reach. I mean, you couldn't get through because that's how jammed their phone lines were.
But I was also just struck at one person who said that some of these initial calls are just, you've got to do something. And it's not clear what. Again, like there isn't I want you to do this. Yeah, a plan. There's not a plan. Whereas with the White House, they've deployed people to influence Cassidy's vote, to influence Todd Young's vote. To influence. The people are. There's a coordinated line of actions that are taking place. It's not just somebody saying do something. It's somebody saying vote for this candidate, or we're going to run somebody against you, or I'm going to donate to your opponent, or I'm going to make your life, difficult back home.
There are groups for Cassidy who are like pouring money into, hey, please vote against him. Please vote against him. That obviously didn't do it. I mean, the threats are so manifold, I guess, for him voting against. If you're weighing, some liberal groups running a couple ads against you versus, the weight of MAGA coming at you, that's not really it's not really a debate.
Right. Let's pivot to talking about Doge. So this, is the Department of Government Efficiency. Early on when Elon Musk announced that he was, going to do this Doge, I mean, it was almost like okay, so what? So you're going to have some department, and you can't have a department because that relies on an act of Congress. And it's also named after the crypto, that you use in your companies or that you founded. So right from the get-go after the election, there were these questions about its structure and legitimacy, and because we even got questions from our readers and subscribers about do you have anything on this? And we're like, no, there is nothing. Well, that was quickly as soon as Donald Trump took office, that was fairly quickly dispensed with because he signed an executive order establishing it that used an existing structure within the executive office of the president, the U.S. Digital Service. This was created by Barack Obama to deal with the debacle of the healthcare.gov launch, and Trump, using the authority that he has available to him to structure the executive office of the president how he sees fit, was able to move kind of quickly. This is what got Musk and his team sort of, with this full head of steam going into USAID. There's still questions about how legal this is because of their status as federal employees or contractors and access to sensitive information. There's still issues there, but here's the thing: there was a plan. Which is weird.
On the campaign trail, I'm trying to think, did he ever say, we're taking down USAID? Like, that was never something that came up when he was running for office. It might have been a little veiled criticism, but it wasn't like, and we're doing this, So
I mean, there have been questions about the efficacy of foreign aid among a certain contingent of politics for going back decades. This isn't the first administration to say that they want to collapse USAID into the State Department or unwind it or just, scale back on the level of foreign aid. But the rapidity with which they moved on this.
I mean, it was truly a shock and awe. I mean, there were people who were unaware that they were going to lose their jobs. And now they're, trying to figure out what's next. So I can't understate the degree to which this is kind of it feels like an existential threat if you are living in D.C. or in the suburbs of DC. I mean, the federal workforce, if you know a federal worker, someone who has no idea what their future is going to look like. And that's a very strange environment to live in.
It is. And to be fair too. Like this is still playing out in the courts. That there are a number of lawsuits that have been
Yes.
filed by parties who have standing, and mainly people who have been terminated in outside the bounds of what the federal merit protection system is and so forth. So this is going to play out like it. I think a little differently than what the sort of the bluster is, but the issue that it brings up is that we initially were faced with this like sort of amorphous structure, the Department of Government Efficiency. They were just going to do, it wasn't even clear who was going to be on it and what they were going to do and what the laws they would be subject to. And then pretty quickly, they used an established entity that exists within the government, and that was the vehicle. It was sort of
They figured out, they had the plan.
Right.
Again, yeah, I see the thread that you're but they had a plan for how they were going to do this. Now, we weren't aware of the plan,
Right.
which is why everyone here is kind of like sort of breathless.
Right.
But the question is, and they're not really sharing what the big plan is, like
Right.
what happens, like, we keep getting these reports. Okay, they're, the DOJ is in NIH, DOJ is the Department of Education, DOJ, like where it's as a journalist, it is very difficult to sort of track or even wrap your arms around sort of the magnitude of what's happening right now,
Right. And some of the traditional ways that we would track that, I mean, these are being sussed out. The Congressional Research Service released a report on the implementation of DOJ and said that, among the issues that are the way that they put it is potential areas of interest. One is scope. Another is appropriations, because Congress does have say over whether this office has funding. I mean, they do fund the executive office of the president. The continuity of its legacy activities. Is it going to still do some of the stuff that the digital service did? The transparency, what are they, can you FOIA, what they're doing? Do they have to adhere to open meeting laws and sharing, information, particularly if somebody is outside the government and is involved in this? Records, ethics, and conflicts of interest. This has come up again and again with Musk. Musk is a government contractor. He has billions of dollars in government contracts, particularly with SpaceX and Starlink and things like that. And he is in a position where he is looking over government contract records and government payment systems and so forth. So these are all issues that CRS has identified as a potential area of interest. It's playing out. Again, this is what I've tried to tell people you're asking, like, what's going on, is I try to step back a little bit. And it's not a comfortable answer sometimes because things are happening so quickly, but this is still the beginning of the beginning.
Yes. The tip of the spear, as they say. Mm-hmm.
Right. And we're seeing this play out already in the courts. The courts are reactive on these things, but
the courts are the last like check and balance. Well, journalists, but in the three branches of government, Congress effectively belongs to Trump. So the courts are sort of it for challenges.
And I think but I don't think it's it is
the fourth branch.
The issue of us being the fourth estate, I think, is like we're here to keep tabs on things that are going on and to report independently outside of the government and to let people know what people are doing, what the government is doing in the name of the people that they purport to serve. So we have an important role to play, especially now. This is when people like us, people will ask us over and over again what is going on, and this is why I feel like this is an important part of that too. This is what is happening. This is what's going on. Last one I want to talk about a little bit is the budget process. Every time there's unified control of government, the government, the White House and the chambers of Congress, which its political party controls, have an opportunity to go through this sort of expedited process that avoids some of the filibuster and all those annoying things that prevent people from doing just whatever they want with public policy. So the first step in that is a budget resolution that has to be passed by both chambers. Now this is something that they've known that they would need to work on for months. This predated, the swearing in of Donald Trump. It predated swearing in of the new Congress on January 3rd. But there have been They have some grandiose plans to extend tax cuts, to get more money to the border, to develop more energy sources, to beef up the defense department and defense industry. And the House, which is, likes to go first on these things. They like to say that, revenue needs to originate. The Constitution says that too. Revenue needs to originate in the House. They feel like they have the prerogative there. They have been arguing over a multitude of issues among the most basic steps of the budget process, including whether there'll be one or two budget resolutions. They thought that they were going to get this all settled a couple weeks ago down in Florida when they went on their House Republican retreat. They did not. They haven't gotten it done so far, as of the
and it's not looking good
this
either.
podcast.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe
they don't even know whether they want to do
right
one or two
second.
bills. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, but the Senate is going to take the lead now, which is not really sort of. I mean, it's kind of controversial. It's not really how these things have been done. As we say. So that's kind of a last chance because I don't think the House is coming to any. It's such a fractious GOP caucus. You talk about having a plan versus not having a plan. That caucus is such. Right. It's so divided on so many things that it is very hard to imagine them coming up with an effective plan.
Right.
It's just it's too disparate.
And meanwhile, Lindsey Graham, who's the chairman of the Budget Committee in the Senate, says, I have a plan. Guess what? I'll give you a few more days, but then we're going to start marking up the budget resolution in my committee. And we're going to get the ball rolling because we know what we want, even if you don't know what you want. Or maybe they do know what they want in the House, being charitable, but they don't have a plan yet. I apologize for using this word so many times.
I know I didn't know where you were going with it, but now that we're in the conversation, Jason, I'm totally with you on this. Yeah, actually, because I was like, but yeah, you're right. There was a plan with the Trump administration. I don't know if it came from Trump or if it came from the folks who he works with, but there was a plan to sort of, go into these agencies and sort of cut them down. But this budget resolution, it's been sort of scattered from the start. Are we going to have one big, beautiful bill or two big, beautiful bills? How many big, beautiful bills are we going to have to get
so
President
many big,
Trump's,
beautiful bills?
All the big, beautiful bills. So, so that was a question. Like that was sort of, they were going to let, but it also kind of speaks to the degree to which Congress has been kind of defanged, right? Like this is all sort of the administration's show now. All the movement is happening in the White House. It's not happening in Congress. And I think this is what Trump wanted.
Yep. Well, Jess, thank you for going through that. I'd also, and we're going to keep talking about this, but I like just kind of almost feels like a lightning round of these examples because again, we're still at the early stages, but I think this is valuable to when these sort of light bulbs appear, to talk them out.
There's so many things to get your arms around right now that when you can kind of point out a couple, I think it's useful,
And speaking of pointing out a couple of things, it's time for this week's Words of the Week.
I didn't know about this. Okay, what is this?
All right. So this is a part of the program where we attempt to de-jargonize or at least define some of the jargons that we use in not just at this podcast, not just in the newsroom, but in Washington in general. We're jargon heavy, and so some of the things that we take for granted, I like to just sort of shine a little light on them from a variety of sources. We have our own. Back in days past, we had a congressional dictionary for CQ. There are other sources that I use. I usually lean on the CQ American Congressional Dictionary because it's still relevant. And today's words of the week are budget resolution. And the budget resolution, this is a concurrent resolution. That's something that has to be passed by both chambers, the House and Senate, in order to be considered a concurrent resolution in which Congress establishes or revises its version of the federal budget's broad financial features for the upcoming fiscal year and, several additional fiscal years. One of the more common ones is the 10-year window that we see in reconciliation. Like other concurrent resolutions, it does not have the force of law. But it simply provides the framework within which Congress will then consider revenue, spending, and other budget implementing legislation, like the reconciliation process, which we'll get to in another episode. But that's the words of the week.
Do you know what it sounds like to me? A resolution? A plan.
It sounds like a plan, which may be why it's so delayed. So that's the budget resolution words of the week. So Jess, thanks again for talking through this. I'm glad that we could introduce you to words of the week.
This is exciting for me. I feel like,
so exciting. So exciting.
All right.
And we'll see you another time. And for our listeners out there, thank you very much for listening or watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, tell your friends and neighbors about Political Theater. Let's get more subscriptions and rate us on iTunes. It always helps. Thanks so much. See you next time.